So, as Althea has just mentioned, we were asked to do some work on quality frameworks, and this involved us looking at some frameworks that already exist and trying to make some sense out of them and seeing what they had in common and what was different about them. But in order to start thinking about this, just to sort of get our thoughts into a place, because evaluation isn't and monitoring, I suppose, are not entirely context-free. They're done for a reason, and there's a purpose behind it, or there should be. And so it's trying to get behind this and saying, what is this all about? What are we trying to do this work for? And these are some of the things that it could be for. So some suggestions could be about sector-led improvement for organisations and individuals working with children and young people to evaluate themselves and possibly to share examples of practice across between themselves. They could be about recognising excellence with an award, which could also potentially contribute to sharing good practice. Or another possible use, are they intended to help establish a common standard against which to compare organisations? And a different purpose again, could it be to demonstrate the value of the sector by providing evidence of impact, that word that Francois told us to avoid at all costs? So is this about development, accountability, consistency, and who's it all for? And I think those questions will continue to be asked throughout this. So our work was contributing, or the idea of our work was to contribute by establishing sector views on what constitutes quality in work by, with and for children and young people. And that's really what today is about, and the continuing conversation that we'll be having. To identify commonalities, differences and gaps, and to help establish a set of propositions for the Arts Council England to test by commissioning further activity. So this is just the beginning of something that, as Laura is very keen to say, we're on a journey. So this is the beginning of our journey. Or maybe it's already started and we're joining on halfway through. So this is what we were set to do. So this is how we did it. We undertook a desk review of 30 quality frameworks, and we selected those according to criteria. Of course, there were more quality frameworks than that, but we selected the 30 that best fit with what we've been asked to do. Most of them originated in England, but there were some from other countries as well. We analysed their contents and identified the quality principles that were either overt or implicit in what they were saying. And our partners in Shared Intelligence have also spoken to 15 representatives of arts and cultural organisations so far, and some of those people are in the room. I'm now going to hand over to Pippa Lord, who's leading the project and has been reviewing the quality frameworks, to tell you a bit more about what we found within them.
Okay, thank you. I've got about 10 minutes to speak to you this morning before that I then hand over to Ben, who'll carry on the presentation and conversations with you. So as Caroline's just said, at NFER we selected and reviewed 30 quality frameworks. And just to give you an outline of the kind of areas that these quality frameworks covered, of course there are more, as Caroline said, but our 30 covered a range of audience sectors, clearly and obviously related to the arts and cultural sectors, but also to schools and voluntary organisations more broadly. Some were actually explicitly aimed at more than one audience, for example, addressing an education and arts practitioner audience, particularly where arts organisations and schools work together. The frameworks cover a range of art forms, the ones that we looked at. They looked at all art forms, or they would just call it, they would be about arts and culture in general. We also looked at some that were specific to individual art form areas, and I know a lot of you here today are obviously from those different sectors, dance, theatre and so on, and I've spoken to some of you already, so that's great, thank you. And we also explored a number of frameworks that were actually non-arts specific. And we included these because we thought these would be a helpful way of looking at some generic principles around young people's engagement in positive activities in general, to see what we might be able to draw on from those ones. About half of the frameworks we looked at focus specifically on children and young people, but within that they rarely differentiated by different age groups, so it would be for children and young people of all school ages or all ages. But we also looked at some as well that were for children and young people and adults, to see if there were any lessons that we could draw from good quality principles around work with adults. And I think Ben's going to pick up on something about that later, about surely we can draw on good quality principles for work with adults, and are those the same that you need for children and young people or different? It was rare for the frameworks to target specific groups of children and young people. So they might provide examples of work with children with special needs or children from disadvantaged backgrounds, but actually differentiating the kind of principles that we might have for those young people, that was very rare in the frameworks. And instead, inclusion was a key theme. Almost all of the frameworks covered good principles around equality and diversity, as you might expect. And then the types of documents that we looked at, they included things like practical handbooks and guides, inspection and assessment frameworks, and policy and strategy documents, and also some research reports. And you'll be hearing about some of these in the sessions, in the parallel sessions that you're going to today. I know some of them are covering specific quality frameworks. So what did we find? How are quality principles organised? I'm sorry, I think the titles, the questions that we had have disappeared off our slides, but this one's about how are quality principles organised. And when we put all of the 30 frameworks together, we realised that there was no standard set of principles relating to work involving children and young people, but instead there was a range of quality principles underpinning the work by, with and for children and young people and adults. We included those as well. But where we looked at those that were specifically about children and young people, we found that there were two ways that those principles seemed to be organised. And the first way looked at content, context, process and product. And this was particularly highlighted in the Art Smarts model from Canada. And we found that that could be applied actually to a number of the other frameworks. And we thought it was quite a helpful way of moving away from a polarised view of process versus product, because it brought in these other dimensions of context and content as well. And then the second way of organising principles around quality, we found that there seemed to be kind of 4 key levels. We've put 3 of them up here, and one of them's missing, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Our 4 key levels were principles that were children and young people focused principles, artist-focused principles, and organisation-level principles. And then the one that's missing from the slide, because it was very rare in the frameworks, were principles around the quality of the art itself. So in terms of organisation-level principles, those included things around governance arrangements, management, finance, planning, monitoring and review, compliance and safeguarding, and so on. And we suggest that for the purposes of our quality conversations today and moving forward, we actually suggest that all those kind of principles are actually taken as read. Those should be things that an organisation is doing well anyway. And when it comes to their work with children and young people, there may be other specific organisation level principles that perhaps you do want to look at in with more attention, such as leadership, training and development, and the nature and quality of organisational partnerships. And I know some of the sessions today are looking at partnerships. In terms of artist-focused principles, the framework specifically looked at things like the artist's pedagogy, their role, their professional and personal attributes when working with children and young people, particularly relationships and interactions, which are 2 words that have come up a lot already today, and their professional background and experience. And we sort of looked at the frameworks and thought, but that's not to say that a specific kind of background or training is expected or needed for artists working with or work that involves young people. But it's just that when you look at the frameworks, you can ask, could there or should there be a way of defining quality that encompasses the multiplicity of artists' backgrounds and experiences? And then in terms of children and young people focused quality principles, these covered areas such as relevance, their degree of ownership, their role in the work, the nature of collaboration, their sense of belonging, progression, and also importantly drawing on their own experience, which picks up on what Francois talked about earlier this morning. And as I said, the one that's missing off our slide are quality principles around the art itself. So that would be principles around technical attainment, for example, or the nature of the performance. But it's very hard to get a handle on what these were from the frameworks, and I'm sure this will come up in conversations today. So having looked at all our frameworks, were there any actual common features? So I've just outlined the diverse range, but were there any common features? Well, yes, there were. The language of quality commonly included excellence and also notions of vibrancy and creativity. There were common underpinning values, and those included things like a commitment to children and young people, inclusive practice, and clarity around purpose and roles. And a key underlying driver was the promotion of continuous improvement and best practice, and being clear about what you're trying to achieve for children and young people in terms of engagement and enjoyment and learning, and so on. In terms of measuring outcomes, and we need to be careful about how we look at this, according to how Francois introduced us to this morning, the frameworks recommend using a range of outcomes, a range of measures to look at outcomes for children and young people, but the ones that we looked at were mostly qualitative rather than quantitative. And so did the frameworks highlight any gaps? Again, apologies that the question at the top of the slide isn't there, but this one's about gaps. Well, yes. The frameworks highlighted gaps, particularly around defining principles and measures around the quality of the art itself, which I've just mentioned. The frameworks also, the ones that we looked at, mainly focused on work with children and young people, rather than work by children and young people or work for children and young people. And in this project, we were asked to look at by, with, and for. So it'll be interesting to see how that spectrum kind of pans out in the work that you're doing, and whether you can offer anything that might help us to get a handle on work that is by and for children and young people. As I said, the frameworks rarely differentiated by age group or particular needs. And the frameworks, they focused on outcomes and impact, but mostly around that sort of immediate satisfaction, intrinsic, immediate kind of outcomes, rather than anything beyond that. So I will now hand over to Ben Lee from Shared Intelligence, and he's going to talk even more about some of the differences and commonalities based on the sector interviews that he's conducted.
Thanks, Pippa. Okay, yet again, missing title. What the title actually says was, what have we found from the interviews? And I'd start just by saying, why did we do the interviews? Well, any research project wouldn't be worth its salt if you didn't have some kind of stakeholder interview stage at the start. But it was more than that. We had a really clear steer from the Arts Council, and this is quite notable in the way that we've been developing this project with Arts Council England. We had a really clear steer that this wasn't about just doing some consultation, find out what people think. This is really, right from the outset, about creating a conversation, a quality conversation. And I think, I'm guessing I'm kind of putting kind of ideas in, words in their mouths, but I think it's because even right from the outset, there's a sense that actually it's about ongoing quality conversations every day that might be where the kind of where the state of this this issue is at, and that's why. Just a quick plug. Has everybody seen these things knocking around in rooms? Yes. Does anybody know what they are? Okay. Is anyone right? Okay. just to be, in case you haven't worked it out for yourselves yet, these are questions, these are taken from the 3 questions which each of the parallel session leaders has set out. And what we're really keen to do, and this is just a little kind of, it's a little device, it's not the be-all and end-all of the quality conversation. What we'd like you to do, though, is if you've got ideas, if you've got answers to these, write them on these cards, give them to me, or leave them on the table here throughout the day, and I'll start putting them up on the wall. And we're going to use that for that final, the kind of continuing the quality debate session this afternoon. So if you've got ideas sparked by those sessions, pick up one of these postcards, write what you think, either give them back to me, give them to the people leading the parallel sessions, or bring them back to the desk. So this really is about kind of expanding out. We started with just 15 stakeholder interviews, and from what I've heard today in the first parallel session, I think we did really start to unpick some of the issues that people are that really resonates more widely within the sector, and the key issues for us that have come across are there's already a vibrant debate about quality and young people in the sector, but there's a kind of, well, where next? What next? What do we do with this? It's there are some at the top line. There are some really clear, consistent messages. We heard a lot about participatory process. We heard a lot about child-centred activities. We heard a lot about the positive nature of the experience as a measure. We heard a lot about the quality of relationships and appropriateness to maturity. We're not saying that's what quality is, but what I'm saying is those were consistent messages that we heard in our early round of stakeholder interviews. And we also heard a consistent message, a real kind of enthusiasm and positive reaction to the fact that the Arts Council wants to show leadership in this way, but not by saying we're going to go and bury ourselves away and write something, but actually by really engaging the sector and trying to create a conversation. The second thing is we also got a real sense, and again this has already come out this morning, about people thinking in much more challenging ways, really challenging ways about quality and about raising the standard and about seeing quality coming from process, from pedagogy, from peer challenge, from everyday quality conversations in the course of practice. And also, I think there was a sense amongst some people who had clearly given us a huge amount of thought. And some of those people we talked to first, we've now asked them to kind of blog about this on the online, the kind of mini site that goes with this project. And if anybody else wants to blog, then just come and see me, because we're looking for more blog authors. But we've got a sense amongst people who've really considered these issues that actually maybe there is, there's some challenges about challenge. Do we? This is kind of paraphrasing, but are we as singularly focused on those objectives? Child-centeredness. Are we as singly focused in practice as we would like to think we are in our theory and philosophy of our work? We also, again, it's kind of come across in the desk work as well, we heard much more about work by young people and with young people than work for children and young people. I don't know why that is, but that's what we heard, and that's kind of also reflected in the desk research. There were lots of other issues too, which again have kind of resonated in the early discussions today. A real balance, no right answer, but how do you balance having something which is generic enough to kind of create some norms and be a kind of common discussion across the sector, but specific enough to be used in practice? There was that, again, a lot of pragmatic comments about people saying, well, look, we know what we want to do, we know what we want to achieve, and sometimes actually achieving that means having something which enables you to demonstrate to funders what we're doing. So some real pragmatic value in having something more specific around quality, whether it's frameworks or something else. There was also people kind of riffing on this idea of, well, what happens if rather than a framework, it's actually more of a process about kind of professional rigour. That's great for a large organisation or a medium-sized organisation, but what about the kind of, kind of mixed kind of, portfolio career practitioners? How do they engage in something which is about kind of reflective practice? Some real challenges there. And also, a real sense that quality is actually different, not just across different art forms, but in different settings. So people talked about how, kind of publicly funded kind of projects with music and dance are about the kind of the quality of the experience and might have some other objectives, whereas actually in a kind of in a class, in a lesson setting, it's really just about achieving a given standard of competence or a given exam. Although even then people say, well, actually maybe that's changing because the demands of people are changing, demands of children and indeed the parents are changing. So there's a lot of kind of other kind of loose ends, but I think it's the kind of the top three that were the real kind of take-home messages from this. And we also heard, a real challenge from some people, and again this has come up in the discussions today, I'll just add this as kind of like a footnote, that, some people really wanted to challenge this sense that absolute artistic excellence and child-centeredness, they wanted to challenge the idea that that's somehow on an axis, somehow they're two opposite poles that need to be balanced. And people were, more than one person said, if participatory art, if participatory activities with children and young people transforms those young people, then it is by definition brilliant. And I guess, and that's kind of linking to the point about kind of adult work. And people said, and actually the same would be if you were working with vulnerable adults, with people with learning disabilities, and so on and so on and so forth. So that kind of in a nutshell is where we got to.
I'm just going to round this off. I'm just going to round this off by posing these questions, and these aren't questions that we know the answer to, so it'd be really helpful to engage with you about this through the day and after today as well. So the first one is hopefully very provocative, which is, do we need these quality principles? Should we be trying to do this in itself? And to what extent is it a useful exercise to see if we can achieve some quality principles that might be generic? And thinking back to the wider context, which I was talking about at the beginning, where is the need for quality principles coming from, and what are they needed for? To what extent can we use the same tools for different purposes, or is there a need to develop different tools to suit those different purposes? And in terms of the work that we've been doing so far, are we focusing on the right kinds of issues, or is there something that we've really missed that's really important and that we need to know about? So we're looking forward to continuing that conversation with you, and hope that will happen in this Q&A session and further throughout the day. So thank you.